So today we're going to do the elimination reaction. And what I did here, I used a 250 milliliter round bottom flask, and I added the alcohol, about 20 milliliters, but what matters is that you know the exact mass. So what I did is I did weigh the graduated cylinder with the 20 milliliter of the alcohol, and then after I transferred the alcohol here, I did weigh the graduated cylinder again to see exactly the amount transferred, not the amount in the graduated cylinder. The second part was to add this ember list, which is a source of protons. So you know that in an elimination you need a Bronsted acid to help with the elimination. So ember list is a cleaner way to have a sulfuric acid. Instead of adding the real acid, it's in this kind of sieve, in this kind of resin. The only issue with the resin is like when you put it there, it has the tendency to stick to the glassware. So one way of putting it in is you use a funnel, and after you put it in there, you use this gun. You kind of hit it on the side to make sure that all the resin doesn't stick on the walls of your round bottom flask, because if it sticks, it's not going to be good when you assemble your simple distillation. So at this point we're ready. We have the two ingredients, and then I put a magnetic stir bar. So my first step is to build a simple distillation like we did before. You always start from the bottom up. So I have to connect the round bottom flask to the lattice. So you use clamps. First step is put your clamps there. Then you attach the round bottom flask to the lattice. Now make sure it's secured. Then the next step is we're going to put the three-way adapter, and remember we always grease, put a little bit of grease in here and make sure it's sealed. Then we're going to put our condenser. Remember the condenser, you put the tubing before you attach the condenser. So I'm putting a little bit of grease also on this side. And now I need to secure the condenser on the lattice. So I'm going to turn this a little bit more just to make it reach the lattice. And remember, the condenser had just to be like loosely held. It doesn't have to be completely tight, just to make sure it doesn't fall. So we're putting here the condenser. And of course it takes a little bit of practice to kind of push them until they fit in the right position. And don't make anything tight, because you can break everything if it's tight. So I'm going to make sure this rotates. I can already see that this is not working. I'm going to try to switch to a different clamp. Okay, this is more flexible. Now all I have to do is just make sure it's held on the lattice. But you see, if you do it too much, it will come off. So you have to find the right position so it doesn't come off and it doesn't fall either. So here we go. I think this is about the right place. Just hold it in place and make sure it's all connected. Then I don't want my rubber tubing to touch the hot plate, so I'm going to turn it a little bit to make sure it's not in the path of the heat here. And I'm going to turn this a little bit. So now the water needs to come from the bottom to the top, but before I run the water, make sure you secure the glass pieces with keg clamp. I'm going to try to lower this a little bit. Remember, this has to be completely secure. And they're directional, meaning like one side is bigger than the other, so make sure you put them in the right position. And then we need to put a thermometer adapter. And place the thermometer. And the last thing is to put the two-way adapter to collect our product. Now this one definitely needs to be held with a keg clamp. And as you can see, everything is still loose. I'm just going to tighten it one more time, just make it sure it's in the right position. Now everything seems to be in place. So we're good to go. The last thing is to put something to collect our product. Run the water. So the water comes from the bottom. And so this is my bottom end. Then start running slowly the water. Making sure that the condenser has a good flow of water. So this looks like it's working. So we're going to stir and heat. And I want to make sure the hot plate is touching the round bottom flask. So the good idea is to start stirring slowly. We don't really need to stir in reality, but sometimes, it's always a good idea to make sure that everything is working well, and then especially the heat here, have to be very careful so it doesn't overheat and you don't have vapor escaping. So I think this is it. So we're going to have to wait until we collect the product, and we'll go to the next phase, which is the extraction. So it's been about probably 30 minutes, 40 minutes since we started. Now I want you to notice that I wrapped the round bottom flask with aluminum foil. Ideally, we should have heated this in a round bottom, in a heating mantle, but I wanted to kind of like take a look at it every now and then. But this is not the ideal conditions. But here's what we do. We collected enough liquid, so what I'm going to do is stop the heating. We can turn the stirring off and then stop the heating and let it cool off. And then we're going to be ready for the extraction. One thing I want you to see is that during the whole entire experiment, the temperature never went above 80 degrees Celsius. So that's a very important point. And the reason is, at the beginning, the digital stirring here, the heat was, I set it up at 350, the dial, and at the end it was at 400. So don't ever go above that temperature. Otherwise, you might have this amber list kind of shooting up there, and you will have bad results. So now we're ready for the extraction. So first step, you transfer your liquid here, and we're going to first add some sodium carbonate. Actually, I can add it right here, 5 milliliters, just to remove all kind of acid from the mixture. So I have here some sodium carbonate. I'm going to add about 5 milliliters. And if you add more, that's okay. But I want you to notice here that we have 2 layers. So it shows that the reaction worked, and we have 2 layers of liquid. So first step, we're going to use sodium carbonate. And you see that the aqueous layer is the bottom layer because the sodium carbonate moved straight down to the aqueous layer. And then you shake a little bit. And we want to make sure we have the solution is a base. I'm going to dip this, and it's not enough, so I'm going to add more sodium carbonate. Actually, I could run it a little bit from the bottom, but it's already turning blue, so it means we had enough sodium carbonate. So that's our first extraction. My organic layer is on the top, the aqueous layer is at the bottom. I don't need the aqueous layer, so we're going to let it run, and then we're going to rinse it with sodium chloride just to saturate, to salt it out, you know, the step in extraction for salting out. So I'm going to put also about 5 milliliters of the sodium chloride solution to salt it out. But not yet. I have to first remove the aqueous layer. So the aqueous layer will be discarded here. And then we're going to the sodium chloride solution. And this is the salting out process. Now at this point we let it separate, and you can start to see that it's much clearer than earlier. So you discard the aqueous layer, and we're going to collect the organic layer in a small Erlenmeyer flask and add some drying agent, which is the calcium chloride. So this is my last step. Another way is to pour it into your flask from the top, or you can use a pipette. Our final product. Now one thing about this product, it really, really smells bad. So don't walk around with it outside. It really is very, very strong smell. So what we do at this point, it's the last step, is to completely dry it with some drying agent, which is here calcium chloride. So we're going to put a few pellets of calcium chloride, and ideally you leave it there for about 10 to 15 minutes to allow the pellet to really absorb all the moisture. In the meantime, what you do is you're going to have to pre-weigh your final vial so you can collect your product in there to calculate your percent yield. So here's my last step, is to transfer my final product, and you can use a pipette, of course, to pipette it out, and then don't forget to cap it. And at this point you're ready to weigh it, take an IR and an NMR spectrum. Last step, which is very, very important. We need to clean up everything we used. And this in particular, this lab in particular, has very smelly substances, but it should be the method you use for all experiments. So everything needs to be dismantled, like we said. If we started from the bottom up, it's at the end. And everything needs to be rinsed with acetone into a waste container. I like you to have always like a beaker like this one, a large beaker where you collect all your wastes. So that was my first piece that is now rinsed completely. The second step is the condenser. Of course, it's attached to the keg clamp, so slowly remove the keg clamp, remove the tubing, and then you rinse it into that large beaker, the waste container. We're going to rinse it all completely. Now this is fine. It doesn't mean that it's completely clean, but it's ready to be washed with soap and water. The next part would be to remove the thermometer from the adapter. Rinse your thermometer in the beaker, same thing. Then the thermometer adapter, rinse it in, not the rubber but the glass inside. And now what do we do with the round bottom flask? This will be cleaned later. We normally have to put the sieves in a different container. So what you do, you have to have your cork ring and cover it with this. Ideally, you just put this septum right there and you keep it like that for a little bit until we take care of that in the next step. Now we still have more stuff to rinse. We have the 3-way adapter. We also have the flasks we use for the extraction. Every graduated cylinder you used, make sure you rinse it. This was where we collected our sample. And then the flask with the salt. And the last important piece is the separatory funnel. You also rinse it before you wash it. Now at this point, everything was rinsed, at least the organic compound was rinsed off. You see here this deposit is probably the sodium chloride that was saturated. So we're going to wash everything with soap and water. So we're not done yet. But this beaker, at this point, you can cover it with your hand, walk to the waste container, dump it there, and rinse it with acetone before you wash it with soap and water. So this is the last step, is to clean your round bottom flask. So you bring it here. This station will be ready for you. And it has some filter aid, which is a sealite. So it's a powder there that you filter this amber list in there. So you have to put some acetone and you pour it in here. It will filter the amber list, and later we will take care of that. So you need to take care of your round bottom flask like this. You see how it's completely clean? The last thing is that stir bar. So you have to pick it up, and I would rinse it one more time like this, and then you can take it with some paper towel and wash it.